Well, thank you guys so much for coming out tonight. My name is Rachael Callcut. I am actually a surgeon here at UCSF. A little unusual for a surgeon to be involved in artificial intelligence. Not so weird for surgeons to be involved in innovation. We drive a lot of innovation, as you can imagine, in device development. But artificial intelligence is a space that traditionally we have not been in. However, there is a PBS special that was just released yesterday from some of surgeons at MGH who are using artificial intelligence also in surgery. For those of you who are interested in that, it's a pretty good video. Their stuff's pretty early on, not nearly product ready. I think I have the best job in the world at UCSF. I'm sure a lot of people who work at UCSF feel like that, but I'm actually correct because I get to save lives. So as a surgeon, I'm actually a trauma surgeon and general surgeon, emergency general surgeon. So I split my time between here and San Francisco General Hospital. And so I, on any given day, get to actually truly change a life in a very tangible and meaningful way and have this tremendous connection with my patients. And then on other days, I get to come over to the Parnassus campus here and lead a world-class team of innovators who are trying to rapidly innovate around the artificial intelligence and digital healthcare space. And I hold the role of the director, the inaugural role of the director of data science for a university-wide initiative called the Center for Digital Health Innovation. There's a tremendous amount of innovation, as you guys have learned, that happens on our campus and of course in our region and with folks around this region, both academic and startup companies and businesses. The thing that's unique about the initiative that I run is that we focus on digital healthcare, and in this day and age, pretty much everything that happens in a medical environment is digitized in some capacity. So that really gives us a very broad scope and spectrum, and I'll tell you a little bit about our program, show you a little bit about our vision, and then as of November 19th, I can actually show you a real product that is coming to market. So we're gonna see that. Which leads me to the disclosure slide. A number of years ago, before I got into the AI space, I never had anything to disclose other than my federal grants, which come from the Department of Defense and the NIH to do this work. But you can't bring innovation to the market without having partners in the industrial space that actually are experts in product development. We at an academic center are never going to be the experts in product development. And so we partner with some groups. The Smarter Health Initiative is the name of the artificial intelligence initiative that I run. And we receive funding and co-development opportunities with 4 companies that we can talk about. The only one in this talk that I'm actually going to refer to is the GE partnership. And by the way of full disclosure, since this is continuing education, the technology I'm going to talk about is not FDA approved yet. It has an FDA 510K pending, which is why we can talk about it. And the University of California holds the intellectual property, and GE has agreed to license that. So there is a financial relationship there. So I just want to disclose that. So why do we care? So I think probably everybody in this room has heard this a million times, but this is the latest data that you can get your hands on. It actually comes from 2017, and what you see on the one side here is that our per capita U.S. spending of healthcare expenditures are exponentially going up and have been since the 1970s, with a precipitous rise in the last 15 to 20 years. And that would be fine if we had the most expensive healthcare in the world if we actually got as much value from the dollars that we're spending, but it's pretty clear that we don't have the highest life expectancy. So if you look at the other chart, and you can see everybody on this bell-shaped curve essentially, or this part of this curve, that blue dot that you see way over to the side, this one over here, you can see that? That's actually the United States, so we're way off the curve. So we spend way more than we get value from. And so this really prompted a lot of people to look at this from a public health perspective. And I was originally trained as a public health researcher, card-carrying what we call health services researcher. I was not a data science and AI expert when I started in this field. And I was taught to do all these things to look at population averages to really try to figure out key questions. So who gets access to healthcare? How do they do when they get access to healthcare? And fundamentally, what are the results and how much does it cost? And when you start to delve into this, there's a lot of limitations in the data that is available to us to do these types of research, and so we'll talk a little bit about that. The other thing that happened now, almost 20 years ago in 1999, many people have heard about the To Err is Human report that came out from the Institute of Medicine that said that basically we weren't providing the highest quality care that we could in the United States, and that there were actually a fair number of patients who would die due to medical error. And so there was a refocusing on trying to do things that made healthcare more safe, effective, efficient, patient-centered, timely, and equitable. And that has really defined the last 20 years of healthcare regulation, both federally, locally, and within institutions that are accredited for healthcare. What also happened simultaneous with that is that there, right around 1999-2000 was an inflection point that healthcare costs for employers started to rise pretty precipitously. And when the employers saw this Institute of Medicine report, they essentially got together and created something called the Leapfrog Group, not Leapfrog Toys. A lot of people know the Leapfrog Toy company, not them, but an actual group of Fortune 500 companies that came together late 1998 because they knew this study was coming out, and they essentially said that they were going to drive value-based purchasing, essentially. So how could they get the most value for the folks who they insured and that they were responsible for? That has created an entire industry of outcomes research that's centered around patient safety. But those investigations, although I do think has made it safer, what it's really uncovered for us is that the problem was actually probably worse than that, because a more recent study in 2013 said the number of people who actually died of medical errors was even higher than what it was estimated to be in 1999, and not just because of population growth. So this is corrected for population growth. And so part of the problem with the research that we do is that when we are health services researchers, we're very limited by the data that's available to us, and each of the data sets will have inherent biases in them because we as investigators and when we study things as researchers, we think we know what we should be looking at. So even though we're trying to do unbiased work, we bring our own inherent biases into it. And we've focused in trying to make healthcare outcomes better by focusing on either structures about where you get cared for and how hospitals are constructed and how care is delivered there, the process of actually what happens when you get care, and so a lot of efforts have been focused there, and then we look at the outcomes and how you do. So what that really means is that research is done like this, and you don't have to be a researcher and you don't have to understand this, but for me to tell you that basically, we've been limited by the data resources. We do great outcomes in health services research, and lots of fantastic innovation has come from that. But there is an opportunity to do something a little bit different, and that's what we're trying to do by having this wealth of data that's now available to us. And so the problem is that we've needed to focus on this as a science, and we're actually doing that now as an industry. And the truth is that basically everything that we know about patients for many years is based upon the treatment average. So if you actually went and looked at the original trials and design for any study, they will talk about what the average treatment effect is. And essentially what they're saying is, for everybody who was studied, how did the average patient do? So none of us are average, we're all very individual, but our techniques and our approaches are not designed to pick up the nuances in the individual that make a difference. Maybe it's my biology, maybe it's something about my age, maybe it's something about what I bring to the table with my pre-existing medical conditions or my genetics, my family history, so on and so forth. Or maybe it's something about my socioeconomic community that's not well captured in the data that actually influences how I do. And so what we do in data science and AI is actually get around many of these limitations of data. At the same time that we have approached this from a medical standpoint to actually improve what we're doing with our science, and I'll show you that, I think it is no surprise to anyone that we are leaving behind a digital footprint, not only in our medical lives, but also in our average daily life. This is sort of always shocks people. So and these numbers I actually updated about a year ago, so these are probably out of date now, but there's 1.2 billion smartphones in the world. So there's people who are carrying smartphones who don't even have electricity or running water, and they figured out ways to charge them in public facilities in developing nations. So we can even get smartphone data from folks who have very little infrastructure, and that always surprises people. But the top one is amazing. Every 2 years we generate almost 90% of the current data we have. So the data generation is exponential, and we have had to think about how you corral that data. This is another way to look at it, kind of a busy slide, but pretty much everybody in America now, in the United States, is using some type of access to some type of a YouTube video or a cell phone or a tweet or so on and so have you. And this is the data from 2017 about what happens every single minute. So look at that. 4.2 million videos are watched every minute on YouTube. 4.2 million videos. I don't watch YouTube videos, so I don't understand that, but or some of these other ones, Amazon's making a lot of money every minute, and I would imagine they're making even more in 2018, almost 2019. There's 3.6 million Google searches every 1 minute. Every time one of these things happens, there's data that's being collected about them. So that's why when you go to Google and you search for something, they have AI running in the background. So then the next 20 times you come to Google, especially if it's a product, it keeps popping up at the top of your list of stuff. That's why, because they're learning about you. They're continuously learning about you, even if you don't think they are. And I tell everyone that, and essentially Big Brother is really watching. In medicine, the same thing happens. So every CT scan now is at least 1 gigabyte of data. If you get an MRI, that's 150 megabytes. And so the exponential growth of this, plus our electronic medical record, which we all in medicine love, I love that cartoon down there, has really spawned a whole industry around data science and healthcare. And basically data science is the approach to these massive quantities of data. So I'm a public health, population health researcher originally, and then I had this very unique opportunity to retrain as a data scientist because I was one of the few people in the country at the time who were really interested in finding the intersection here, because I think a lot of the problems that we're trying to solve about making care more efficient, more effective, more cost-effective actually require a population health approach, but leveraging the techniques that are available in data science. And I think the real key of innovation that's going to be transformative in healthcare happens in the middle there. Okay, and so I think you got to wear both hats. And I love this quote. This comes from a book, Big Data, which is the last slide in my talk, or close to the last slide. If any of you want to read it, it's a quick read. You don't have to know anything about medicine. But essentially, it makes the case of what I'm talking about, that we're no longer constrained by the things that originally constrained us in doing research. And so there's really an open door for us. And it's probably one of the most exciting times in healthcare in a long time, because we really do have the chance to be transformative. You will hear the term big data. This is starting to fall out of favor a little bit after only 4 years, but all I really want you to remember is that when we talk about data science or big data, what we're talking about is predicting. It fundamentally comes down to prediction. Can I figure out something about you that tells me how you're likely to do? And as you evolve through your care, whether that's inpatient care, outpatient care, just in life, being well cared for and having good health, can I figure out something about you that helps me to know what I need to do to keep you on that healthy trajectory or get you back to a healthy trajectory? That is fundamentally what data science and big data is about, okay? A lot of people know about this. It dates back now. It's pretty old. It's 9 years old. This actually appeared in Nature. I wish I would have written this paper. For those of you who don't know much about healthcare, Nature is like, to get something in Nature as a scientist is like, it makes your career. It's kind of like the New England Journal for our basic scientists. So some very smart people that worked at Google, they had a lot of really smart people that worked there, they decided that they could predict the flu epidemic before the CDC could in the United States based on case reports, just based on what people were searching in the Google search engine. And so people were putting in things like, I'm coughing or I have a fever or whatever, and based upon the traffic of just the search engine itself, they almost perfectly could predict what actually was happening with the flu epidemic. Some people have repeated this since, and it doesn't do as well, but that's expected because these artificial intelligence algorithms, to actually be effective, they have to be continuously learning, and so they have to keep up, because what happens is, as people learn about this stuff, they change their behavior, right? So the way that people search now might be different than it was in 2009, and so they have to be continually evolving to actually be effective. Really key point, but this is pretty groundbreaking. Anybody here work for Amazon? Okay, so they won't admit that this is what happens, but there's a lot of people who sort of study the business side of things, and they think that this is actually, from a social engineering standpoint, how Amazon actually works. Do you ever think about how you get the book on the same day you order it? Right? Like, how can they get it to you in 2 hours? They can do it now in Northern California where we live because there's a lot of distribution centers, but in a lot of places in America, that's a pretty hard feat to get you a book on the same day. So people think that based on your past history of searching in Amazon, your likelihood of purchasing, so how often do you purchase what you look at in your purchase history, and some other characteristics that they learn about you from your behavior of what you search for and what you buy, they actually can figure out the likelihood that you're going to buy a book before you actually purchase the book. Okay, based on your behavior. And if you're someone that they believe is going to likely purchase the book, they begin the process of processing the book before you've actually ever completed the order. And then they have places along the way that they can pull the order out of the system if you actually don't end up purchasing the book. Okay, so that's called Amazon anticipatory shipping. People have written about this. They've never confirmed that that's what they do, but there's reason to believe that that's how it works. There's lots of things like this. The other example is Netflix. Netflix designs TV shows now based upon who their user group is that watch their shows, and they know they're going to be a hit before they ever make the show, okay, because they know what people like. So they do that, and they've admitted they do that. Anybody know about the target pregnancy prediction? This is fascinating. So a 16-year-old girl whose dad happened to be sort of a powerful person in the community started getting mailings directed to her from Target for pregnancy-related items. And the dad got very upset and wrote a pretty scathing editorial and letter to Target saying, please stop direct marketing to my 16-year-old daughter. She's not pregnant. She was pregnant. And so they were able to guess it, but they were able to guess it from their algorithm, not by anything that she bought. So it's not like she went and bought a pregnancy test. That would be pretty easy to figure out. It was all benign things that you would never in a million years have expected would be related to pregnancy, but they knew the pregnant women who registered for like their baby registry. They knew their purchase history from their frequent shopper card. The frequent shopper card is basically a way for them to study you, in case you didn't know that. And they knew what people's behavior was and the rate of purchase and all this stuff, and so they knew she was pregnant before her parents did. This is the book. I actually moved it up a little bit in case anyone's interested in it, but we're talking real dollars here. Like, this could be an overestimate and underestimate. People who are in this field are very excited about it, but if we actually solve this, we might actually save $300 billion a year. So remember that. That's a big number. There are a lot of other things that we've done in science that haven't yielded those cost savings. Here's the problem, though. People are like writing books about it and stuff. Anyone know the Wanamaker principle? So the Wanamaker principle basically says, this is a guy who spent a lot of money on advertising way back at the turn of the century. He was an early businessman. And he's like, I spent a lot of money on advertising, and I know it works, but I don't know what part of it works, okay? So the secret sauce here is we have to figure out what part of that data is actually important to us and really be able to see the signal so that we can actually change that paradigm from treating to the average to treating to the individual. Now, this is not precision medicine in the sense that I'm making a precise cocktail for you if you have cancer therapy, as an example. This is that I can recognize what we would call phenotypic signatures of a patient. So basically, we can narrow down the type of people that you look like so that we can narrow the scope of who gets what treatment so that you get more tailored treatment. So that leads me to Smarter Health. Smarter Health is our advanced analytic and AI initiative here at UCSF that is really tasked with trying to accelerate the dissemination of these digital technologies and leverage data science to rapidly innovate. Our typical timeframe of project from concept and design to delivery to our commercial partner of a pre-market proof of concept artificial intelligence algorithm is between 6 months and 18 months, depending upon the complexity of it. And in the medical space, for us at an academic medical center, that's a pretty rapid innovation cycle. We do this by doing research, and then we prototype, we pilot, then we do what's called validation, which means we try to break it and put it in other environments and make sure it works the way it's supposed to work, and then it gets commercialized. Simple. It's not so simple. We work on all kinds of things that are targeted at both the providers, workflow, make workflow more efficient, targeted at patients to make patient experience better within the hospital system, things targeted to keep patients out of the hospital, and everything in between. people often ask me, what do we decide we're going to work on? We try to work on what we call high-impact, high-cost problems. This is the most recent. It's from 2016 from the CDC. These are the top 10 leading causes of death by age group. So one of the things we do is this a big and important problem that we want to work on? If it costs a lot of money, we're interested in it. If it's a pain point for the healthcare providers or for patients, we're interested in it. And if it takes a lot of lives or creates a lot of long-term consequences, we're particularly interested in those. So we're not just doing science fair projects. We're interested in really making transformative change. But this is hard work. I'm making it seem like, oh, it takes 6 months to 18 months to do this. We actually have to really try to figure out what's key about all this massive quantity of data, because it's very difficult to do. This is a real patient. Anyone see a pattern there? I don't. Looks like noise, right? Just a lot of scatter there. We're trying to take something like this. This is not special data on a patient. This is routine monitoring data, minute to minute, over a 24-hour period of time on patients in the ICU, in the intensive care unit. So there's nothing special about this data. I didn't go and put special monitors in or capture different things. If you were an ICU patient or your loved one was, this is the kind of data we would get on you. And I don't know what to do with this. My brain doesn't work in a way that I can see a pattern there. But there is definitely a pattern there. And here's a perfect example of how we took that pattern and we changed the visualization. These are prediction tools. And so we can go from that, by finding the right signal, to this. And what you see here in this figure 1A is actually a prediction out to 50 hours ahead of time of a life-threatening event before the clinicians recognize the life-threatening event, and now I can predict it out to 50 hours ahead of time. If I can predict it out to 50 hours ahead of time, I have a way to visually display it to your bedside provider. There's an opportunity potentially for them to mitigate a poor outcome. Okay, so that's the kind of stuff we're talking about. But that's really hard work to pick out that signal. So the Center for Digital Health Innovation actually started about 5 years ago to do this kind of work, and they initially started with the key parts about how you actually get data out of the health system, because that's really difficult. All that stuff that the nurse puts into the computer, hard for us to get it back out to do something with. So they concentrated a lot on the building of the infrastructure, and 2 years ago we launched the AI initiative. A word about the UCSF GE collaboration, because it's pretty unique. The groups came together 2 years ago, 18 months ago, after the launch of the Smarter Health Initiative, to really try to do these 3 things: enhance bedside clinical decision-making of providers, to increase productivity, so essentially take out inefficiencies in the healthcare space, and then to try to develop innovations that wouldn't just work at UCSF, but would work around the world. So that's one of the things that's a key for us that we work on. Yes, we're interested in building things for our local healthcare system, but we're really building them with the sense that we actually want to transform medicine. A 10-year partnership where we sit side by side and co-develop technology that we then allow GE, if it turns out that they're interested in it, to actually take to market. So they take it to the finish line. One of the very first projects came out of a initial lab here in the Department of Radiology. 2 investigators, Dr. Taylor and Dr. Mongan, had a pre-existing interest in could they actually make the queue, the list of what they read as chest x-rays, work better. That was their intent. And they were really interested specifically in a condition of collapsed lung as an example. So a collapsed lung is called a pneumothorax. You don't have to remember the name. And so they were designing a work efficiency tool. At the same time that I was interested as a clinician, as an ICU and trauma surgeon, to figure out whether or not I could know about these collapsed lungs in a more definitive way at the bedside faster. I'm an experienced clinician, so it's unlikely that I'm not going to see it when the x-ray is taken, but if I'm not standing at the bedside when the patient's x-ray is taken, there will be some delay before I know that the x-ray had been taken that I just ordered. So I was looking at ways that we could actually move the diagnosis part of this up. We combined efforts and we developed a tool that deals with this. So when you read this many x-rays as a radiologist, you think, okay, I'll probably find the one that has an abnormality. But the truth is that radiologists read lots and lots and lots of x-rays, and it multiplies the amount of imaging that's taken in healthcare systems every year. And so what they were working on was, could they take the 3 x-rays that might be the ones that most likely have a finding, because the vast majority of a chest x-ray for patients who are inpatients isn't going to have a life-threatening problem on it, but they get read in the order in which they're taken, okay? And not based on the order of what's likely to be there. So they developed a very early pilot that would take these 3 x-rays and in real time continually move them to the front of the queue for the radiologist to see. So we were trying to use AI to continually reprioritize, and every minute x-rays are taken in the hospital. So they were trying to develop something, developed an early proof of concept that essentially would find that's a collapsed lung on the one side, the one x-ray out of that entire queue that was likely to have a finding. A collapsed lung is not a rare event, but it's not something that happens every hour in the hospital. So these are things that can delay in time of people detecting them, and if they're delayed long enough, can have real, true life-threatening consequences. So we partnered together. I'm going to try to switch screens here for 1 second and see if this works. I'm not selling any products. I'm not endorsing any products, but I think it's interesting to watch what actually happens, and this is our product coming to life. I want to be really clear that I'm not endorsing any product, but the logic of what we built is built into this device. So this is a portable x-ray machine that comes to the bedside of you in the emergency department or when you're really sick in the ICU. I didn't realize this before I got involved in this work, but that machine actually has a computer in it, okay? It has chips in it. And this is what an x-ray will look like now when it's taken. And the artificial intelligence runs for the detection of the collapsed lung. It alerts on the device. At the same time it alerts on the device to the bedside providers, it streams directly to that queued list and continually reprioritizes. So we took that early innovation of the radiologist and expanded on it collectively at the same time that GE built a machine that was capable of performing AI at the bedside. So we'll be one of the first to market. There have been a few FDA applications for AI in the healthcare space. They've been relatively limited in scope and relatively limited in the complexity of disease. Just like we wouldn't let a plane fly on autopilot without planes in there, we're not going to let machines make decisions without doctors there. So all of these are having checks and balances with doctors. So we're not replacing doctors in any capacity. The things that have been approved so far, just over the last year, is really when we've seen any of these approvals. These are the only ones that have been approved that are up here, have been low-risk things like a wrist fracture detection or early diabetic retinopathy, so early eye changes. If you miss an early eye change and then you get re-looked at 3 to 6 months later, relatively low risk. Ours will be the first one that's actually functioning in a time-sensitive, life-threatening environment, so very complicated. These come with lots of cautions for this very low risk eye thing that was approved for the diabetic detection. These are all the cautions and warnings on the page, okay? So there's a very significant concern by the FDA and regulatory bodies, and they're continuing to have to redefine their processes because they were not designed to address this issue, okay? So they're having to redesign the whole FDA regulation, which is part of the slow diffusion of the innovation. And we don't want to be in this headline. So AI does not stand for artificial intelligence. It stands for artificial ignorance, according to these guys. And they highlight some of the big failures of AI, like the self-driving car that hurt somebody and killed them. And so we have to do this in a very safe way, and so I always provide that caution. I'm just going to end by showing you where we're going. So I'm a trauma surgeon, so I can't give a talk without talking about trauma. Lots of people die in the United States and worldwide by trauma. It's the second leading cause of death worldwide, actually, is trauma. In the United States, it's the leading cause of death for those aged 1 to 44 years old. It costs us billions and billions of dollars worldwide a year, and the patients are still dying of the same causes today that they died of 30 years ago, which is primarily hemorrhage and traumatic brain injury. So we're working on AI solutions to solve this, and I'm just going to end with this video, which is based on a real patient story, and this is not her in the video, but based on her story, and we have her permission to share. Not that long ago, I had a patient who survived, a very young patient, survived a truly catastrophic injury that if you looked it up in all the books, that person should not have survived. And when that patient woke up and went back to her life, she came back to me about 6 months later and said, "Why was I the one that survived?" I want to be able to answer that question, because whatever that magic was that we created for her
We want to be able to do that for every patient. In healthcare today, we probably use less than 5% of the information that's gathered on patients to make our decisions when we're in these time-pressured, time-sensitive environments. We generate more and more medical-related data, and up until recent times, we have not had the computational expertise, the tools, and the equipment to be able to take that information and translate it into something meaningful. The emerging field of using advanced analytics with large data sources is going to revolutionize the way that we provide healthcare. The goal of the trauma bay of the future is patient-centered care, where all of these digital inputs and the data we gather from the care we provide leads us to new opportunities to mitigate risk and complication for patients. Nurses maybe aren't using the computer to document anymore. They're back at the bedside of the patient like they used to be. And a computer is automatically documenting all the important things, and the humans are just augmenting what the automated information is that's flowing into the system. As the clinician at the bedside, I'll be able to be ultrasounding, and the ultrasound will tell me when I've gotten enough images to arrive at an interpretation. So it will be able to say, here in this particular location, it appears that there is blood. I'll be able to then more quickly tell the people around me to hang blood products to help resuscitate that patient. At the same time, the monitors that the patients are hooked up to are smarter monitors. They're gathering more meaningful information on the patient that tells me at what point in the physiologic space is the patient. So right now, you're in extremis, you're doing really, really poorly. And if I do these particular inputs, we expect that you'll be in this next space in the next 5 minutes. And if you're not there in that space that we predict based on the decisions we make, the monitoring technology will help to tell us, you're not there, and here's where we need to change our pathway to get you there. The advances in computers and computer technology has really allowed us to be able to do what we theoretically have believed was possible for a long time. And now we're changing theory into actual practical application. We are not off in a lab growing cells and testing things, which is all important research, but this actual research is done side by side with the patient. I think the exciting part about the work that we do is that our solutions are not 10 or 15 or 20 years in the future. Our solutions are now. When I go to the operating room and I have to operate in someone's chest and I'm the one that's touching their heart, that's an amazing experience. And the ability to bring tools to the table that help me do that job even better, I know that it will mean that I can save more lives.
So I feel really fortunate to work at a place that when I decided I wanted to do something very different and very innovative, that I had a lot of people around me who supported me, and the work that I'm showing you and the things in that video are all in flight. They're real projects. This takes a tremendous amount of people, and there's well over 50 people who are involved in the initiative that I run. So with that, thank you so much for your attention, and at the very end, we'll take questions. Okay.
So the name of my talk is Technology Innovation and the Safety Net. My name is George Sue. I'm a pulmonologist, critical care doc, sleep medicine doctor, primarily over at San Francisco General Hospital. And let's get started. So just by way of introduction and definition, the Institute of Medicine, which is an affiliate of the National Academy of Sciences, defines safety net as such. So core safety net providers are those who, by mandate or mission, offer access to care regardless of a patient's ability to pay, and whose patient population includes a substantial share of uninsured, Medicaid, and other vulnerable patients. So Medicaid, of course, is the public benefit for those with income levels defined as low or very low. And these are primarily the patients, or these are the patients that we see primarily at San Francisco General Hospital. This is a view from our new hospital, the top, the garden, looking over the mission. And San Francisco General Hospital is part of the San Francisco Health Network. This is supported by the Department of Public Health. This includes San Francisco General Hospital as our primary tertiary care center, Laguna Honda Hospital, and also a network of community safety net clinics, community clinics throughout the city of San Francisco. This slide shows our directive, and it's a nice mission statement that I'd like to share with you. This is a pyramid where the apex is the community and our patients, supported by a vision, our vision to be the best hospital by exceeding patient expectations and advancing community wellness in a patient-centered healing environment through our mission to provide quality healthcare and trauma services with compassion and respect, supported by the values of learning, improving, engaging, and caring. And we measure these through what we call our True North metrics. So all of our activities are framed around metrics such as safety, improving quality, improving care experience, developing our own people, and financial stewardship. So this is a pretty ambitious vision and mission statement for ourselves. And the medical healthcare sector as a whole is challenged to do this and do this with lower cost. None more challenging than in the safety net. So this seems to open up an opportunity space for us and other healthcare systems for technology innovation to help us. However, this is not as easy as it would appear, particularly ironically for those of us here in the Bay Area. And I wanted to present a case to illustrate some of the calculus that we as safety net providers think about when we think about adopting innovation. So this is Dr. Norman Jeff Holter. In 1947, this American biophysicist invented this device on the left. So this is an 85-pound backpack, okay? And in 1947, Dr. Holter was able to transmit radio-electrocardiography signals, okay? And he did this while seated on top of a stationary bicycle or an ergometer. And so this was the first Holter monitor. And many of you might know what this device is. The more recent rendition of this, in 1976, this was from a brochure, the Model 445 Mini Holter Recorder. Okay, so this box is now, in 1976, is now shrunk from that 85-pound backpack into this thing, which is maybe kind of like a big Walkman device. And then 40 years or so to 2015, the Holter monitor isn't appreciably changed so much. The leads look pretty similar. The stickers are a little bit better. The snaps are a little bit better. The device is a little bit smaller now. And if you take a look at what the device looks like, and this is what we still have in our cardiology laboratory. This is a Holter monitor. So this is maybe a small Walkman with the leads as such. Over the last 10 years, as some of these devices have gotten smaller and smaller, this is a representative of a wearable device. This is called a Zeo patch. So this essentially is a 2-lead ECG that can be placed as an adhesive over the left chest wall. All the hardware mechanics or components are in that small casing. Right? So patients can actually wear this free of wires, free of that box. They can exercise. They can take a shower. And not only that, but 14 days worth of data can be contained in this device, as opposed to the 48 hours that were contained in the Holter monitor. So the way this device works, there's also a service model attached to this. So the device is applied to the patient. The patient can wear this then for 14 days, shower, bicycle, exercise. As soon as that 14 days is over, they take the device off, put it in a pre-addressed mailer, send it to the company. The company will download that data, upload that to their own secure servers, through proprietary algorithms, analyze the data, and then come up with pretty sophisticated reports. These reports are sent back to the referring provider. Okay? So this is a pretty terrific innovation. And if you think about our mission statement for improving healthcare, patient experience, we seem to be checking off a lot of those boxes. Okay? So this device was introduced to our hospital a little over 10 years ago. And this was the response that the company got. So why is this? Why was there so much reticence? Part of this reticence comes from this list. So this is a fairly generic list, which is representative of safety net institutions. But I think we can collectively call ourselves those institutions with relatively poor revenue streams. This is particularly due to payers and restricted reimbursements around procedures and devices, fewer resources in our system, increased operational demands, and this has a lot to do with our patient population. Our patients tend to be more complex, have more severe disease, have more care requirements, and in general are vulnerable. So there are more requirements for better care. We have a focus on maintaining core operations, therefore, so our margins are very narrow. So we don't have a lot of margin to take risks experimenting with new devices or new technologies, and so we tend to be risk averse. So this is a pretty ingrained cultural phenomenon for safety net institutions. So therefore, we tend to be late adopters over early adopters of technology innovation. So this changes how we think about adopting even very, very good ideas like this Zio patch. And it changes the calculus around how we look at innovation when we first evaluate it. We were fortunate enough to receive some funding through the California Healthcare Foundation to take a look at this more carefully, and specifically around using the Zio patch as a case example. So this afforded us an opportunity to really go to the cardiology laboratory and seek what the need was that we were trying to solve. So a lot of the talks that you've heard over this last month or so really focused on design thinking. And the tenet of design thinking is really to try to understand what indeed is the problem you're trying to solve. So we went into the cardiology laboratory and first took a look around. These were the Holter device casings, or 10 devices that were in our laboratory. And right next to that casing, set of casings, and just to describe how Holter monitors worked, those devices, patients are referred for ambulatory ECG monitoring. They'd come to the laboratory. The devices were placed on the patient. The patients would leave, go home. After 48 hours, they'd come back, deliver the device to the laboratory. The device would be taken off. That data would be uploaded or downloaded to a computer in the laboratory. That data would be analyzed by the technologist there, create a report. Our institution is an academic institution, so our fellows would take a look at that data. Then an attending cardiologist would look at that data, interpret the study, and then post that to the electronic health record. All right? Now, right next to that computer where the technologist sat was this. Now, what is this? Inside of each of these envelopes is a study that's yet to be analyzed. So what could the reasons be for there being a pile of these stacked next to the printer, next to that computer? No time, right? So either the technologist was the only person there, or he or she was distracted with other duties, right? Or perhaps the software required to read that data was cumbersome and hard to use, or just very painful to do, and the technologist didn't want to do it. But the consequences of this, whatever this was that caused this buildup, were pretty substantial. So the wait times to get into this, to get one of these tests was longer than we would accept. The turnaround time for these reports to get back to the referring provider were sometimes extraordinarily high and definitely unacceptable. Okay? So now we're talking about different dimensions of need that potentially could be satisfied by a device like this. So we went to look at this a little bit more carefully, mapping out those workflow efficiencies that potentially could be improved. So this is mapping out from the referral at the beginning to the review of that referral to the fitting appointment, how long it would take to get in, how long it would take to put the device on, how long it would take for that device to come back, that pre-scan, that second big yellow bar there is how long it took the technologist to actually look at that data because she didn't have time. And then the fellow read and the attending sign off. And so this is just an example representative, but 100 days is far too long. That is far too long. That's a safety problem for this service, okay? So we modeled what this might look like with the new technology. So we would considerably drop, we'd offload all that pre-read scanning to the company, right? We'd actually increase some of that wear time to 14 days, and we gave allowances for the fellow being slow. I'll say that the fellow likes this software much better, so this is much faster now, okay? But even with modeling on the back of an envelope, we could see that we could probably decrease that time by half, at least. So this led us to really try to put together a multi-dimensional value assessment, because our value assessment or valuation of this device at face value, oh, it's a great device, you know, this technology is small, the form factor is terrific, it feels great for the patients will love it, wasn't quite enough. So we broke this down. Our first tier, of course, is that it has to meet or exceed the standards for clinical efficacy and safety. So this is a given. That has to be the case. Second, it has to be appropriate for our patient population, given who our patient population are. Right? Again, we serve our most vulnerable patients in the city of San Francisco. And then this additional value-based assessment, breaking this down into different dimensions, such as service. Okay, so with service, can we improve access? Can we improve responsiveness of our cardiology ambulatory ECG monitoring service? And what we'd be looking for is the referral to testing times, the third next available appointment, which is a metric that we use to essentially measure wait times. Okay, what are our reporting times? And what are our referral conversions? For all the referrals that come in to the laboratory, can we convert those to testing? Or are they just languishing on that wait list? Productivity, can we actually do more units of service? Can we maximize those personnel costs, right? So that technologist that had very little time, can we maximize that person's time better, okay? And then cost, right? Of course, how much does, this is the offset to all of this, is that how much does the cost of each device, how much is the cost of that personnel time? What is the cost of, or what is the return on reimbursements? And then finally, since we seem to potentially be able to recover a lot of that time that the technician or technologist puts into this service, what do we do with that time? Can we repurpose it? So is there any additional potential for disruption, right? Could we, for example, create a new on-demand service, right? With 10 Holter devices, there's no way we can do it an on-demand service. Inpatient providers can't send patients down to the cardiology laboratory and expect to get ambulatory ECG monitoring that day. That wouldn't happen, okay? So, or is there a new indication that would benefit from 14 days worth of monitoring as opposed to 48 hours? And then the magnitude of externality gains. Could you actually repurpose that technologist's time to do other things, all right? So we expanded the dimensions of value potential for this device, and we studied this. So how did we do? So we broke this down into a pre-period of a year, a post-implementation period, adopted these devices. So the California Healthcare Foundation, again, bought devices for us, donated to us for a year to see what implementation would look like. And then we did a follow-up assessment a couple years later for a full year for a post-steady state. So this is what that space next to the computer and next to that printer looked like within 3 weeks after implementing this device. Looking more objectively at some of the data, this is the referral to results reporting time. We're looking to publish this relatively soon. That pre-period with the Holter, we were getting, so this is for those of you who haven't seen these before, these are median values in the middle, flanked by box plots. And we have a very, very high median referral to results reporting times in that pre-period. And almost immediately after implementation of the device, that dropped down to still high, but much more acceptable times for referral all the way to reporting times. And then with our post-period, which was just up until a few weeks ago, those times are really quite nice now. And these fall within our goals as an institution for referral access and also turnaround time for reporting. The externality gain, it turns out that this technologist that was working on the ambulatory ECG monitoring is a pretty highly trained person who can do exercise treadmill studies. And so that person was repurposed entirely to do exercise treadmill studies, and the cardiology laboratory hired a much younger, cheaper version of a technologist to do these ambulatory ECG monitors. Okay, so we actually increased the capacity to do exercise treadmill tests. This service also had its issues with access, with turnaround time. We're able to improve those with the exercise treadmill tests, and also to nearly double the number of ambulatory ECG monitors that we could provide. Now, how about cost, and how about reimbursement? So this is a table just showing the current procedural terminology, CPT codes for ambulatory ECG monitoring. Okay, Category 1 codes are the codes that we use for accepted procedures, right? It's not as important to know what these are specifically for, but you see there's a Medicare reimbursement rate, a Medi-Cal reimbursement rate assigned to these CPT codes. So once you codify these procedures, this is how you get paid, right? Category 3 codes on the bottom are those that are used for emerging technologies, okay, like the Zio patch. And what do you notice here for the Category 3 codes? There's no allowable Medi-Cal reimbursement. Okay, so considering that for us, especially now with Medicaid expansion, our patients are almost 50 to 60% Medi-Cal. Okay, and for all those patients that we apply this device, there is no reimbursement allowable. Okay. So what does that translate to us? Well, in that pre-phase, when we were doing Holter monitors, we had those 10 boxes that we distribute to patients. Our service parameters were terrible. The wait times were terrible. It didn't cost us that much money to do that, right, around $40,000. As soon as we got the device, doing about the same number of procedures, that jumped probably close to or over $100,000. Since then, we've nearly doubled that amount, but that cost has also increased linearly to about $300,000. All right. So this is a very real consideration and problem for us, particularly since we're in a capitated environment. Right? And so there's a negotiated rate for how much we get per patient per year, and that has to come out of the cap. And that means other things that we're paying for could be compromised because we're now paying $300,000 for ambulatory ECG monitoring. So the jury then is still out for us. We've made extraordinary improvements in our performance and service parameters, just fantastic, right? The other gains that I didn't quite mention is that we were able to adopt an on-demand service. We were able to accommodate a new clinical indication, which the neurologists had published some work on the efficacy of doing 14-day monitoring for post-stroke or post-transient ischemic attack patients looking for atrial fibrillation. And a patch like this would work, a Holter monitor would not. So we were able to accommodate a brand new clinical indication, right? And then again, that externality gain with the exercise treadmill. So there's a lot of gain that we achieved with this. However, there's a lot of cost, and we're still trying to figure out where that balance should lie. Some ways that we could potentially mitigate this cost, any ideas? Okay. So that might be a cost that, so the answer was, why not upload that data from home? Yeah, and that may be something, if there are any company representatives here, that'd be a great idea for them, right? I'm not sure how much that would save us as an institution, but that would be a fantastic idea for the company.
Get Medi-Cal to pay up.
Get Medi-Cal to pay up, right? Get Medi-Cal to pay up. So,
The AFib people could die.
yes, exactly, right? And so there's a 5-year archival period for those CPT-3 codes until they're converted to CPT-1 codes. And a lot of that advocacy is around trying to find, those clinical indications, right? And making that case. So I think the company is probably working very, very hard to try to make that conversion as soon as they can, right? But this is really a problem for us in the safety net, right? That's really one of the major reasons why we are late adopters or perhaps never adopters, and sometimes why we might have to accept poor performance because we can't afford this kind of cost. Another way that we've been thinking about mitigating this is to try to address the possibility of induced demand, right? You know, this is a newer device, and perhaps a lot of providers are enthralled with it. They like it. Maybe even patients like it, or vendors might be pushing it. But can we mitigate that induced demand where the demand is actually not medically indicated? And so you can imagine even putting a screening step in between that referral just to see if that's an appropriate referral and trying to limit some of those referrals that way, right? So a lot of things that we're thinking about. Again, the jury's still out. We were fortunate enough to have the California Healthcare Foundation sponsor this as a trial for us. But that sponsorship doesn't really address, you know, how we're going to make this sustainable or whether we should truly adopt it. So now kind of filling out this grid, right, what have we found? And this is to summarize. So we did, you know, reviewing published comparative effectiveness studies, low rates of adverse effects that were published and also found in our implementation trial. We think that we've satisfied number one. Number two, we measured very high rates of wear. So 14 days is the max. The median for our patient population, so-called complex patients, vulnerable patients, was 13.9 days. Better than any other published report in any population, okay? And we also have the published high rates of satisfaction in our informal surveys of our patients. They seem to really like the device. Now, as far as service, I already mentioned that we improved everything that we sought to measure. You know, our third next available appointments were better, our reporting times were better, our referral conversions were much better. Productivity was increased, meaning that technologists could now do many more units of service on that same salary and with less time. On the far right, this disruption, again, I mentioned those three things, right? Accommodation of a new clinical indication, on-demand service, and externality gain with the exercise treadmill service. Now, the third column, however, is where we run into trouble. That cost is something that there's no offset for that cost. We still have to pay the company for each of those devices. It's a per unit procurement cost, right? And there's really nothing that we can do to offset that on a per unit basis. So now what do we do with this information? All right, the canonical pathway for us in an academic medical center is to try to publish this, to disseminate the information. And I am happy to share with you that one of the initiatives that we're also working on at San Francisco General Hospital is potentially an alternative to that, because we are still siloed, even from like-minded institutions and healthcare systems, safety net healthcare systems. And so I wanted to introduce this group called the Center for Care Innovations. So the Center for Care Innovations was born of a unique collaboration between the Tides Foundation and the California Endowment in 1999. They've since become a nonprofit, an independent nonprofit. And what their directive is really to try to spur innovation in safety net organization and to try to create a community for all of us, right? So CCI has produced a resource center, but they also created what they call technology hubs. So San Francisco General Hospital and the San Francisco Health Network was one of the first 3 hubs adopted by the Center for Care Innovations. We're down there on the right lower corner. That's our older logo, the San Francisco Health Network. But now this group of hubs spans the state of California, going down to Los Angeles County, all the way up to Shasta. And I think there are about 12 of us hubs now. And the reason to put these hubs together is to do several things: to create this community, but also to create a forum for thinking about what those problem areas we all collectively have in common, and how could we address them together. And then how could we leverage a program like this to really scan the environment for technology solutions that might solve those problem areas for us or with us. And then, can we collectively use these sites as testing laboratories for those technologies? and learn from them, codify those learnings explicitly, and share those learnings with the community. And so that's what CCI has put together. So this is an example. I know you probably can't read this, but these are an example of technology demonstrations. So these are vendors that CCI has identified, right, and brought them over and have them do a pitch for us. These are recordings of those pitches, and they range from artificial intelligence-enabled scribing with a company called Suki, to measuring patient satisfaction with a company called Tonic Health, sourcing technology solutions with a company called Lucro. So these are all available for everybody who's a technology hub. Then the technology hubs themselves put together these case studies. So once they bring in a technology, they work on it, and with the help of CCI, they'll come in and do videos of our workflows and the problems that we had with implementation, right? The successes we had with implementation. And then documents this on their website for sharing for all the groups. They also go into more depth into problem areas that have been identified every year. So one of the areas that CCI was focused on this year was using non-emergency medical transportation, or NEMT, and how we can use this and leverage this for the safety net better. Right, so NEMT are the non-emergency medical transportation. NMT are the non-medical transportation, which include rideshare services like Lyft, like Uber, and then taxi services. And can there be an intermingling of these two services, or these two groups? And usually these technologies are softwares that allow providers to refer patients for these services to get them to their Medicaid-approved services. So this is a Medicaid benefit. So this has become a $3 billion industry, but we wanted to figure out which ones would be most appropriate for us in the safety net. And so after a lot of work, the Center for Care Innovations puts together something like this, right? So identified 3 potential companies. These are Kaizen Health, Hitch Health, and Round Trip. And then they do a very extensive look, going through vetting, implementation, provider experience, patient experience, and then some additional resources. And then we'll compare and contrast, kind of a consumer reports for the safety net for various technologies, right? And again, I know you can't read this, but this is going over geographic availability. So Hitch Health is not actually available in our area, right? The pricing and cost model. You look to implementation. What are the implementation pitfalls? Right, around customization, implementation support. What kind of EHR integration interoperability can they provide as a company, or would they require anybody else to as an intermediary? Provider experience, and then patient experience. You know, do they communicate with patients well? Are they accessible? What are the options? Is it Lyft and Uber, or just Lyft or taxis? All right. So all this is culled for all of us that are part of this community. And I have to say that these are pretty sophisticated and pretty impressive reports. One last thing I wanted to highlight from the Center for Care Innovations is this. And what is this? It's a sandbox. Yeah. So in kind of technologist parlance, what is a sandbox? Place to go play, exactly. So it's a place to go play, and sometimes we call this a testing server or testing environment or development server, development environment. It's a place that you can play with software, right? Not affect the production software, right? And what the Center for Care Innovations deduced after we were telling them over years and years and years is that one of our problems is that even just the idea of trying to understand whether there was interoperability of a given solution with our system was enough of a barrier that we might not even consider the solution at all, because our own IT resources have very little bandwidth to even think through this with us, right? So what they created was a sandbox called Raven, okay? And the additional benefit of Raven is that they have created linkages to 5 of the electronic health records that are used mostly, right, or used most in our collective of safety net institutions, right? So for us, currently it's eClinicalWorks, that's on here, Epic, Cerner, that's also on here, and NextGen. So the way that this Raven works is pretty simple. I think this is overly complicated, right? But basically you register for free as a safety net institution to use Raven. You look at a library of, there are over 30 vendors that are now listed in the Raven directory as solutions that were, number one, vetted by CCI as appropriate for the safety net and also address indications or problem areas that we voiced to them, right? And all you have to do is click on this, register, click on one of these, explore, and see what it looks like and feels like in your native electronic health record with de-identified fake patient data that's already on Raven, and to test it out. So you can imagine doing this even on a computer in your clinic, and even to try to see how that would affect workflows within your your home clinical environment. And so I think I wanted to keep this talk short, but in summary, even though our safety net institutions are probably the sector of healthcare that are in most need for innovation and specifically technology innovation, there are lots and lots of barriers for why it's difficult for us to adopt these technologies. And so these significant constraints include, our inherent patient population. They're more complex, more difficult to manage. Operational resourcing, IT resourcing, contracting, I didn't really talk about much at all, but there are many, many barriers to contracting that don't exist in other institutions. For us specifically, there are contracting barriers that have to do with points around indemnity and insurance that are required for vendors, which are higher than in other institutions. And then reimbursement structures and policy, which we talked about. We have a limited capacity for technology innovation portfolio management. Other institutions have a group where they can manage a portfolio of promising innovation, and that's just something that we just don't have the resources quite to do. The Center for Care Innovations serves in some ways as our extramural portfolio, so we can leverage that resource as much as we can, but we don't really have that internal resourcing. Pilot-based impact investing, as was the case for that Zio patch, was very, very welcomed and wonderful. We're now using that as standard of care at our institution. So it's a very helpful catalyst, but it doesn't really adequately address all the barriers for adoption of these technologies that we face, nor does it really address sustainability of these technologies for the future. But again, very welcome. And then finally, just extramural resources such as the Center for Care Innovations helps quite a bit. So they also run the Safety Net Innovation Network, which is another opportunity to form a community with safety net institutions, the technology hubs that I mentioned in this Raven sandbox. Thank you very much. Yes, the question was regarding Medi-Cal. Is it federal or state that determines reimbursement? The FDA approval and conversion of codes from 3 to 1 is a federal jurisdiction. Yeah.
But the reimbursement for 1 and not for 3, is that government?
Yeah. So the actual reimbursement that's managed through the state, but the rules are based on federal rules. Correct.
So that's one of the challenges and what we would call barriers to entry for people getting into this market, because in many ways the technology is moving faster than the policymakers can move. And so a lot of people have asked me in the innovation space in general, and specifically in AI, how we're going to recoup costs for this and how we're actually going to make money. The way we will make money as institutions and health systems is to drive down the total cost. So much of care now is capitated in one way or another. So no matter how I care for you, I'm going to get a set dollar amount. So if I can make caring for you safer and less expensive, then in the end, there's a net profit for me. And so for right now, that's probably where a lot of this will generate money for the healthcare system. And that's actually one of the very interesting things about working in the very forward product development. I've learned a tremendous amount about how you bring product to market, and how you actually price these products is incredibly important. So when we've entered into agreements, my husband keeps asking me when I'm going to make money from these innovations, and I keep saying never. I'm doing it for the academic interest and fun of it. I'm definitely, as an inventor in this particular space, much more interested in the patient outcome piece of this. That's really what drives me to do this kind of work. If I was in it for other reasons, I probably would leave academics, but I love what we do. So for many of us who work in an environment like UCSF, we're really driven by that real fundamental mission of changing care. So there are two hot areas in AI right now in healthcare. So the question is, can we combine the two talks essentially to really improve that, decrease that lead time? That will be the next big innovation for companies that like Patch or others that are working on that. But the real hot space is radiology, so the stuff that I talked about, and cardiology is the other big space that AI is being driven in. And part of that has to do with people are really hot to trot to be able to analyze those waveforms. So essentially an EKG is a waveform, and find subtle changes and not so subtle changes in the waveform. Everyone know about the Apple Watch i4, the fourth version. Why'd they put the fourth version out? Anyone know? Anyone know? Other than to make money? The big advertising campaign when they released it was that it had the ability to do arrhythmia detection. So essentially, it's a constant patch. And the company's been working on this for quite some time, actually with Stanford investigators at Stanford University, some cardiologists from Stanford, some of which they've hired away to go work for their company. And they are pretty sure at some point that they will be able to do that. What's interesting about how you advertise these things is they advertise that that's a feature, but then the fine print said feature not available to April 2019. So a bunch of people bought the watch, but you don't actually have the feature. My guess is that that's because of FDA approval and other things like that, because they'll have to get some type of approval, regulatory approval. So yes, you can actually combine the two talks, and that'll be the next big innovation, because that technology will rapidly disseminate. And there's early stuff that shows that we can do it. One of my favorite questions I've ever been asked. So the question, repeating for the video, is, we're basically working on solutions that extend life and save lives, and there's some concern that are we creating a system that's not sustainable, essentially, based on the resources that are available? So the reason I love that question is I really think if you can help people extract more value and stay healthier longer, that they have more years of productive life. And in the end, a lot of the targeted solutions that we're working on are designed to maximize the amount of productive life years that patients have, and we actually have metrics that measure those things. So although it's very interesting, and some companies like Best Buy announced an initiative targeted at geriatric care, the vast majority of the solutions, at least in the AI space right now, are trying to try to help younger generations live healthier lives, and in the end cost us less money and cost us less resources. So I am a believer that we're not doing that, but time will tell. And we're certainly not going to solve every problem with these solutions. So I think probably not. That's my opinion. I'll let George comment.
I would agree with that as well. I mean, it's a great question. I think it does give me pause to think about our life objective being somehow counterproductive in that existential way. But maybe the best answer is to perhaps, Rachel and I will keep working on our end of things, and the rocket scientists can figure out a way to offload some of that population problem, and we will be fine.
I would say the flip side of it, if you take, so we're working on AI in medicine, but there are a lot of people that are working on innovation in other spaces to figure out how to maximize what we have and decrease the consequences of what we have as a society. So there is clearly a finite limited number of resources, But if you take just sort of a step back view and not really, trying to work my way around this, but if I develop an AI application that decreases waste in the medical system, actual physical medical waste, that's a tremendous impact on the overall capacity of our world. And so, and waste comes in lots of different forms. So if I'm doing something that decreases the amount of energy export that's needed to drive something, that ultimately has a positive impact. So you have to think, when you work in this field, I think you have to think broadly about what the implications are of what you're doing, and keep those things in mind. But I actually think that you will see a lot of tangible benefits of this that improve. If you think about it, just when we converted from paper records to electronic records, which was a digital transformation in of itself, we decreased the amount of loss of forests, right? Because we needed less paper. So you got to kind of take the long view on this from our perspective. So yeah, fantastic question too. So the question is, even though we're embarrassing on that chart, is it because we are taking on a lot of the cost of innovation worldwide? There's certainly an element of that, especially in the pharmaceutical industry. So it's exceedingly expensive to bring pharmaceutical drugs to market. And there's a lot of stuff in the literature about how the United States appears to bear a fair amount of that cost for the world in general. AI is so popular that actually there are many other countries that are in essentially an AI arms race, if you want to call that, to see who can get to the finish line first. Lots of innovation actually coming from Israel. Not surprising, a lot of innovation coming from China. The Chinese innovation concentrated in the non-healthcare technology space, although they're very interested in getting into the healthcare space because there's a lot of dollars here. So in AI, it may be a little bit different than in pharmaceutical sales, especially as FDA regulations evolve and they figure it out. But certainly a piece of that cost is related to us bearing the cost of innovation across the spectrum. But even when that's taken into account, our health outcomes are still lower for the amount of dollars we spend on people, by far. Yeah. And either just to put that into perspective for people, we have, which is still shocking to me, one of the highest infant mortality rates in the developed world. And that has nothing really, like that shouldn't be, right, in our country. So lots of opportunity for still improvement. Other questions? Well, thank you guys so much for your attention. This was really fun to share.